The history of Black Americans is rooted in slavery, and there are growing demands not just for apologies for the past, but also payments.
I apologized for the Jesuits' history of slaveholding.
But the path to reparations is an open and heated debate.
It's white guilt, and what they're demanding is extortion money.
So how do you apply equity?
Maybe you should ask yourself and your peers that.
This week, we investigate both sides of the reparations movement.
It is the most powerful place on the planet.
Please raise your right hand.
Though in this aged institution, there's an aging body, too.
Is Congress too old?
We take account and take the pulse of the growing number of aging members in Congress.
And a look into a little-known business of the border crisis.
Who's stashing them and where are they going next?
Once they come into Mexico, they become property of the cartels.
This week, we are on the border in Texas to learn about the side hustle of stash houses for illegal immigrants and the dangerous business behind human trafficking. Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. Today we begin with an examination of the movement to provide reparations to Black Americans over their ancestors' slave status. Demands are growing. It's raising difficult questions about a dark side of America's past and whether, going on 2 centuries later, people who never met a slave should be paid by people who never owned any. And if so, how much is enough to atone for the unthinkable? When Melisande Short Colomb walks the campus at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., she sees a troubling history and the fruits of her ancestors' slave labor.
How did you learn that information?
I got that information that I was part of the descendant families in July of 2016. I was contacted by Judy Rifle, who is the lead genealogist for the Georgetown Memory Project, which was started by Georgetown alum Richard Cellini for the sole purpose of identifying descendants of those families who were trafficked in 1838.
Going on 2 centuries ago, 2 Catholic Society of Jesus, or Jesuit priests, sold 272 slaves at auction for what amounts to about $3.3 million in today's value. Slave labor and profits from slave sales helped the Jesuits finance churches, schools, and America's first Catholic college, which became Georgetown University. Now the Jesuits have launched the largest effort of its kind to make amends and provide equity to descendants like Short Colomb, whose great-great-great-great-grandparents were among the slaves.
So how do you apply equity? It's just a huge job, what you're talking about.
Right, maybe you should ask yourself and your peers that, because you are inheritors of this as well. So I don't have those answers. I am being an active participant in what makes America better, while there are active participants who are opposed to that. So I can't be okay if there are still people out there who want to see me oppressed and deprived of my rights to vote, to freedom, to liberty. And it is saying that these people can have nice things and those people can't.
The Jesuits began reckoning with their past a few years ago when confronted with protests by Georgetown University students. Jesuit leader Timothy Kosicki.
In 2017, around Emancipation Day in Washington, D.C., there was an event at Georgetown in which, amongst other things, I apologized for the Jesuits' history of slaveholding.
Today, the Society of Jesus, who helped to establish Georgetown University and whose leaders enslaved and mercilessly sold your ancestors, stands before you to say that we have greatly sinned. We are profoundly sorry.
And some might ask, what does an apology do? And I think first and foremost, it's a recognition that this happened, that we did this, and that it was wrong. But I think that that act of apologizing, of admission, and contrition can lay the ground for a fruitful partnership.
The partnership included consultations with 3 slave descendant groups.
What I will say to you, Sharyl, is we are excited about this opportunity.
Joseph Stewart is working on the project with the Jesuits.
It's time we put this dehumanizing legacy behind us and put justice, equality, love, self-respect, and human dignity in front of us, in our future. And that's our goal, to impact the future, not to relive the past.
The collaboration has produced the Descendants Truth and Reconciliation Foundation. It will offer reparations ranging from education opportunities to elderly care. So far, Kiseki says the Jesuits have put $15 million into a trust and will raise $100 million more over the next few years.
So reparations in the context of what we're talking about today means moving forward with healing and opportunities and education rather than paying cash to the descendants?
That is correct. With descendant leaders, they were very clear. We want you to make a bold investment in something forward. There is no price. They said to me, there's no price we can put on what you did in the past, but we expect you, using your largesse, to invest in the future.
In many American cities and states, there's growing talk of providing reparations with no single vision of the form it should take. Evanston, Illinois is using money from a sales tax on marijuana to give some Black residents who experienced housing discrimination $25,000 in housing assistance. In California, a task force made up of slaves' descendants is in a 2-year process to propose reparations. Other recent efforts include scholarships from Catholic nuns for Black students in Louisiana, a $27 million plan at Princeton University, $1.7 million from the Virginia Theological Seminary, $1.1 million from an Episcopal diocese in New York, and $13 million from another in Texas. But there's formidable opposition to the new efforts, and some of it comes from the very people who would benefit from reparations.
I really think that it's white guilt, and what they're demanding is extortion money.
Robert Woodson led civil rights demonstrations in the 60s. Today, he heads a group that helps poor, high-crime neighborhoods devise their own recoveries. And he's an outspoken critic of reparations.
If you could briefly define reparations, what is that to you?
Reparations is supposed to be some material compensation for slavery. And back in the 60s, we were talking about the clenched fist, black power, and self-determination. Today, we have devolved to Black Lives Matter with the hand out, asking for compensation. So I just think reparations is really a distraction. It deflects attention away from the real challenges facing the Black community and the country.
Woodson raises questions about reparations for which he says there are no good answers. How does one settle on an amount? Who exactly gets it? How would the millions of biracial families factor in?
The very fact that there were thousands of freed Blacks who owned slaves. There were Native Americans, these 5 civilized tribes. There were 5,000 slaves when they were on that Trail of Tears. They took with them thousands of African slaves. Now, do the offsprings or the families of those Indians who own slaves, do they pay? How about the descendants of the free Blacks that own slaves, do they pay? Here again, what is the purpose? Is it to punish white people for the sins of the past? Are we seeking cosmic justice I think we have to be clear as to what is the purpose of it.
There might be people who say, you could be right, this may not be helpful, but if it doesn't hurt, what's the harm?
Well, the harm is it really presents the critical problem as somehow being external. The problems that Black America faces is external, and that white people have the power to change it if we can make them guilty enough. That's a complicated, confusing, self-destructive message to send to young people, that somehow all of the problems that they face, underemployment, out-of-wedlock births, drug addiction, babies being shot to death, that all of those problems are within the control of white America to change. That's the danger of the message.
You might not have heard as much about them, but billions of dollars in reparations have been paid throughout American history. In 1848, a freed Black woman named Henrietta Wood was working as a housekeeper when a white man kidnapped her back into slavery. Freed again after the Civil War, she sued for damages and wages and won an award from an all-white jury. Since then, federal and local tax money has been given for Black scholarships, cash payments, and community development. In 1971, Alaska Native Americans received $1 billion and 44 million acres of land. And in 1988, American taxpayers gave $1.2 billion, $20,000 per person, to 60,000 living Japanese Americans who'd been held in detention camps during World War II. Whether there will ever be one big national settlement for slavery remains to be seen. A congressional proposal to study a federal reparations program hasn't gone anywhere since April. But the debate is stirring long-standing resentments and even dividing civil rights allies.
Where in the world does anybody identify someone as their victimizer who knocks them down, and they demand that the victimizer come and lift them up? If somebody does, they ought to take you to a mental institution. The victimizer might have knocked you down, but the victim has to get up. And it also prevents Black America from addressing the enemy within. The Black-on-Black murder rate that is occurring, white people can do nothing about that. That is an internal enemy that must be addressed internal to the Black community. So what I'm recommending, there be a 1-year moratorium on talking about white people at all. Let's stop talking about white people for 1 year and come together within the Black community and talk about what we can do to address the enemy within.
It doesn't make things right.
No.
It doesn't mean things are forgiven.
No.
What does it do?
Georgetown has stepped up in a leadership position. I expect them to use all the expertise that they have at their fingertips and in their students and their alumni and connections in the world to figure that out.
One economist from Duke University has estimated that a comprehensive reparations program would cost the federal government and taxpayers at least $11 trillion. Ahead on Full Measure, a look at why so many of our elected officials are so old. If you haven't noticed, the country is getting older. Not that there's anything wrong with it. The average age of the American worker has crept from 30 to 42 over the last few decades. Among federal employees, more than a quarter are now older than 55. But what about our leaders? Scott Thuman has been looking into the more mature side of Washington.
You could argue it's the most powerful place on the planet, 535 decision makers in a 221-year-old building, picking policies that affect almost everyone.
The 4 reasons why every member should vote for this bill today.
Though in this aged institution, there's an aging body, too.
As 2022 gets underway,
just look at the current House leadership. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, 81, Steny Hoyer, 82, James Clyburn, 81.
But not for me.
As for Republicans, while Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is only 56, the top Senate Republican Mitch McConnell's 79. In fact, this is the oldest U.S. Senate ever, with only one member, Georgia's John Ossoff, under 40.
Is Congress too old?
I guess it depends who you ask. And, at what point will the 40 or 50-year-old Democrats just simply say to the entire Democratic leadership team, come on, guys, there's a time to be great and a time to let go.
Gary Nordlinger, professor at George Washington University, points out the Founding Fathers may have mandated minimum age requirements, but not a maximum. And it shows.
I don't know if it's because their age or where they're from, but do they really have their pulse on what people in this country are thinking? I mean, I don't know how often Nancy Pelosi has an opportunity to get outside of her sort of San Francisco liberal echo chamber.
Well, and it's obviously it crosses the aisle as well. I mean, you've got Chuck Grassley.
Oh my God, 88 years old running for re-election.
I think in his re-election video, he was out doing a little jog, trying to be sprightly. Is this an eternal challenge now for some of the octogenarian lawmakers to try and let Americans know they still have it?
Yes, but it's got to be genuine. When you start recycling your footage from 6 or 12 years ago for your campaign ads because you look younger, then you're in trouble age-wise.
When it comes to aging leadership in Washington, it's not just Capitol Hill. The justices at the Supreme Court, with lifetime appointments, average 65. And over at the White House, President Biden, age 79, says he's ready to go again. In his first press conference this year, the president confirmed the Democratic ticket for 2024.
You put Vice President Harris in charge of voting rights. And can you guarantee, do you commit that she will be your running mate in 2024, provided that you run again?
Yes and yes.
If he wins and finishes both terms, he would be president at 85. Meanwhile, former President Trump, if he runs again, would be 78 on the campaign trail.
Can I just say the one positive age, by the way, is you remember history.
What you're saying is there's a lot to be said for experience.
I'll bet the New England Patriots are regretting not giving Tom Brady that 2-year contract extension he wanted.
Like with Brady, the winningest and oldest NFL quarterback at 44, Gary says experience can help avoid mistakes. But if the average American, age 38, doesn't like the surplus of senior citizens in charge in D.C., look no further than the ballot box. Congress has a lowly approval rating of just 28%, yet a more than 90% success rate at getting re-elected.
Please raise your right hand.
Meaning at these swearing-in ceremonies, what's old is new again. On Capitol Hill, Scott Thuman, Full Measure.
Coming up on Full Measure, dangerous stash houses at the border. One growing danger in America's border crisis surrounds stash houses. Cartel criminals move humans across the border into the U.S., holding them like cattle in poor and dangerous conditions. Southern Texas is one place where the number of stash houses and related crime are spiking, with a record number of illegal border crossings. Roma, Texas, Border Patrol gets called about a suspected stash house for human smuggling. When agents arrive, 15 people run out the back, 17 more inside. An hour's drive away in Edinburgh, Texas, 27 illegal immigrants are found stuffed in an apartment. Stash houses are where illegal immigrants are held until the cartels can distribute them across the U.S. 57 in one house, 62 in another.
We may find 70, immigrants in one given place.
Webb County, Texas Sheriff Martin Cuellar.
Have you been finding more people packed into stash houses in the past 6 months or year?
Oh yeah, over a year we've been getting a lot of stash houses, and once we knock, you may see one immigrant open the door, and then all of a sudden you see just bodies laying everywhere. Everywhere that there's a space, they're going to lay. They're going to be sitting down or taking a nap or whatever it may be. And some of those houses don't even have air conditioning. They don't have electricity. You know, they're just made to stash illegals.
Who's stashing them and where are they going next?
Well, you know, you have to remember where they come from, and when they're coming from Mexico, but they're coming from other countries, right? But once they come into Mexico, they become property of the cartels. I mean, they're making millions and millions of dollars, you know, getting the immigrants across the riverbanks. At the same time, they're doing drugs, but they're doing a lot with the immigrants because it's a win-win situation.
So the people who are in a stash house, are they waiting for a ride to be picked up and distributed somewhere else in the country?
Oh yeah, they're waiting. They're waiting for the coyote, you know, that we call the coyote, the one that's going to handle their transportation. And once they do that, they get everything arranged, and it might be an 18-wheeler, maybe in pickup trucks, you know, stolen pickup trucks that sometimes we're not able to seize, but you know, they that's what they do, you know, and they do it best because it's a very affluent, you know, organization that they know what they're doing.
96% of the people that cross through here, the Laredo area, are single adults. That some of these folks, you know, end up in stash houses.
Laredo, Texas Mayor Pete Sines.
These stash homes are organized by through criminal activity, connections to the cartels. We have local gangs that basically are in charge here. These stash houses then translate into tractor-trailer loads going north, train loads going north, and there's criminal activity, there's money, there's drugs. So it's to the point that if it's not controlled in the very near future, it can also lead to something that can be extremely dangerous for us. And I as a mayor, I'm very concerned. This is why I've been asking for resources. Border Patrol, police, and resources. You know, we can root this out. But the cause of this is because the border is not secure. We need to secure the border. You secure the border adequately, you know, you'll eliminate these stash homes. You'll eliminate some of the asylum seekers.
In a period of just a few hours, Border Patrol agents picked up more than 180 illegal immigrants in stash houses in Laredo. After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Coming up next week on Full Measure, as time goes on, there seems to only be more questions about the COVID pandemic, vaccines, and what's next. We head back to Fort Detrick for much-needed clarity from the military's top virologist at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. Unlike a lot of public health officials, he's been spot on. That's next week on Full Measure. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.